Ooh, the Golden Stallion is here for you. Oof. Another little late night recording. Boy, it's been actually kind of a popular thing for me to do is late, but I don't know. It feels a little different. Like most weeks, especially say the Wednesday Q&A for Sovereign Tech patrons, which of course you're listening to. Most weeks I do it, I don't know, somewhere around 10 to 11 a.m. or something during the day on Wednesday itself. Okay. And a lot of the stuff I record, like if I'm recording more of Emotions of Normal People, you know, or something for Sovereign Tech First University, you know, for STFU, I'm usually doing it during the day or something like that. But yeah, sometimes it's in the afternoon, you know, sometimes it's around 3 p.m., something like that. But I don't know, lately I've done some recording later at night, and I feel different later at night. Not like I just had some Formula HJ7. Of course, only the cool kids will know what the hell that is. But it's not like I had that and suddenly, you know, I'm going free, you know, or anything along those lines. But yeah, I just feel different at night. It feels good. I like it. I like recording. Of course, I'm in the BDSM studios here, Brian's Dungeon of Sex and Magic. And, well, anyway... We have a lot of great questions to get into. Not so much as far as tech questions go. A few different things. But anyway, we'll get into them. I do want to say thank you to all who have upped your donation amount on Patreon to become a part of the $5 tier. The rewards for that will be rolling out, you know, as time goes on. So, and it's going to be pretty regular stuff, but really excited to do that. Even had some people say that they were interested in doing the $100 tier of all things, which I can't tell you how honored I am by that. I mean, the fact that people want to hang out with me, like, you know, you got to understand. You know, I was just a shit-kicking nerd. I mean, you know, no one wanted to hang out with me, you know, back when I was a kid. And I mean, hell, why do you think I watched so much television and listened to so much music and everything? I mean, and read so much because no one wanted to hang out. And so, you know, not until I became well into my teenage years, and then people wanted to hang out. But, well, anyway, certainly wasn't. Anyway, it feels good. Thank you. I'm honored by everyone being so interested in what I think about things and so on. And, well, anyway, this is a really fun new venture for Patreon, so I'm really excited about that. Okay, boy, where to start with these questions? I got a few doozies here. Well, you know, actually, before I get into the questions, why don't we go ahead and talk a little tech? The Yubikey 5 from the company Yubikey is out, and that's it's pretty exciting actually, because what they've done with of course I'm a huge proponent of using YubiKeys. I think it's just one of the easiest things that you can do to get some serious security going on. And yes, if you're worried you're going to lose one of your YubiKeys, what do? You buy 2 of them. In fact, when you go to Yubikey's site, which is the only place I think right now that's selling the Yubikey 5, you can't get it on Amazon. But when you go to, and it's always nice to go direct from distributor, especially with a security device, right? Remember how everybody was warning, like, don't buy Bitcoin hardware wallets on Amazon because it could be coming from a third-party seller and they could be putting some kind of funny firmware in there. I mean, you can't, I don't know how much funny firmware you could put, especially when it gets verified by Yubikey's software itself. I don't know how much funny firmware you could put into a YubiKey, but regardless, it's a good security practice to buy straight from the manufacturer themselves instead of through some kind of third party. I mean, that's one of the dangers that doesn't get talked about enough of when you have, you know, we've never, as a species, we've never really had a monopsony, and Amazon is heading in that direction of being a monopsony. Again, not monopoly, monopsony, where there is, there is a complete control of distribution, where distribution is totally centralized, not where, monopoly, where it's production, right? Monopoly is production, monopsony is distribution. Amazon is becoming a monopsony. One of those dangers, really, is that, producers can lose control of what exactly gets shipped out there because they have to send it to one central location, which is a central point of failure. So anyway, buying directly from Yubikey is a great idea. And like I said, they make it easy for you. They'll even give you a deal if you buy 2 of them. Hell, they'll give you a deal if you buy 10 of them. But they have a specific package where you can buy 2 because they know that everybody says, well, okay, I'll use a Yubikey, but fuck, what if I lose it? Then I'm screwed because, again, you use 2 of them. Oh, math, it's difficult. Anyway, so the Yubikey 5, for those that are wondering, what's so special about this? Well, first off, they've added a new ability to it, or at least to the major USB Yubikey 5, which is it's crush proof now. It's not just waterproof and all that other proof. Now it's also crush proof. This is not true for the USB-C models, which there are 2 USB-C models. Also, the Yubikey 5, the main one, which is the Type A one that has your standard USB male connector, that has NFC built into it now, because the Yubikey 4 didn't have NFC built into it. Before the Yubikey 5, you either bought the Yubikey Neo, the Yubikey Neo, which had NFC in it, or you bought the Yubikey 4, which did not have any, NFC. So Yubikey 5 has NFC in it, which is nice because then it can work with your smartphone, which we talked about that in a recent Sovereign Tech Prime episode, talking about like OTP, one-time PIN, authenticator apps and everything. I recommended using a Yubikey through Yubico. Well, the Yubikey 5 is a great thing. I mean, we'll talk about this on Sovereign Tech Prime as well, but that's a great thing to get your hands on. Thing is, they literally just came out like a couple days ago. So, I don't want to wait until Saturday to tell you about it. Jump on it now, and, that way you can get them in pretty early, because kind of like with Google's Titan Key, which we talked about on a Q&A, I think. Google's Titan Key is backed up to like November because the demand was so hot. So you want to jump on the Yubikey 5 as soon as you can. The real reason to jump on it, though, is that it has WebAuth built into it, which is the new technology that we talked about, where you literally are getting rid of passwords for logging into various services. I mean, you're completely getting rid of them, and it's such a great development. You could have bought which is FIDO2 WebAuth. You could have bought, and which I did. I have one. You could have bought for $20, just a FIDO2 key, but that's all it did was FIDO2. It didn't do everything else that YubiKeys are known for. And if you bought one of those, still go ahead and buy a Yubikey 5, because that way you have a backup, and actually you could, if you wanted to, if you are really passionate about your Google account, you could set up the advanced protection using, I believe, you can use the FIDO2 key and the Yubikey 5. So you already have, because you have to have two authentication devices, and I think that both of those together would qualify. So that's not a bad setup to have going forward for you. So yeah, the Yubikey 5, I'm impressed. Yubico is not. I'll tell you, Yubico is not going anywhere. In fact, I think Steve Gibson, who of the Security Now podcast and personal hero of mine, he was kind of hinting, because he's been developing Squirrel, which is really going to get us to a passwordless future. He was kind of hinting that Squirrel devices were going to be developed through Yubico, which I couldn't be more excited about. I think that's wonderful, because I think it's a brilliant and wonderful company. So yeah, the Yubikey 5, you're going to want to jump on that. I already have one on order. It hasn't come yet, but I will certainly do a full review of it after I really mess with it when I get it in. So, okay, let's get into our questions for this week. Like I said, we got a pretty broad range here. How about I open it up with this one, and then, because there's one that's kind of related to music. So we got one that's kind of on a matter of ethics. Then I think last week I hinted at talking about anime. We'll do that. And then we got an interesting one that kind of has to do with music. And we have our album of the week, which our album of the week this week is going to be one that I'm not, say that 5 times fast, that I'm not actually very impressed with. And I'm shocked that I'm not impressed with it, because not long ago I covered this artist's album that I'd recently heard from them, and it was phenomenal. This time, not the case. They just had a new release come out, but you're going to have to wait to, you'll find out what that is as we get to it. So, all right, let's open it up here with this little bit of ethics. Let's see. I know you don't see IP, of course, IP being intellectual property, Stallion breaking in. This was asked on Patreon. I know you don't see IP as a legitimate form of property, Stallion breaking in. That's correct. I don't see it as a legitimate form of property. But do you also see it as a legitimate form of censorship too? It's not exactly equivalent to book censorship, since the intentions of people who promote book censorship laws are not the same as the intentions of people who generally enforce IP laws. But the consequences of both laws are almost the same. And that's the question. So, yeah, as far as, can IP be used as a form of censorship? Yes, absolutely it can. And I actually have, I'll give you real world examples that I have a real fucking problem with. for a lot of, okay. So without getting into like a huge conversation around property, okay, and I don't want to get into that right now, because I don't see property as cut and dry as a lot of listeners of Sovereign Tech, I imagine, do. I put a lot of thought into it, and it's not thought that, it's thought that I, came across and had developed upon from people who are fellows, honestly, of the Mises Institute. So, don't go thinking that somehow this isn't. Yeah. Anyway, Roderick Long, who I am talking about, who I think is absolutely brilliant. I love his work. He brings up a lot of interesting points about property that do not sit well, even though he is certainly a libertarian, certainly a part of, he is I think a full fellow of the Mises Institute and so on. But he does not fall in line very well with Hoppe's definitions of property and so on. Of course, neither does, Bob Murphy. He doesn't agree with Hoppe either, which is comforting, that there isn't some kind of, monoculture going on there in some way. But anyway, so Roderick Long makes interesting, examples about property. But at the end of the day, Roderick Long is saying effectively that, look, property isn't like itself its own theory. It is based upon two other theories, one of those being the respect principle. Okay, meaning that respecting property is inherently respecting, or the concept of respecting property is like respecting a person, is respecting personhood in the same vein. But understand that the notion of property comes from an initial point. Property is not the baseline, right? Property is not where you start from. You start from the respect principle, and then you build up from that. And I think that allows for some interesting interpretations on property that, other people wouldn't necessarily buy into, that might even be listening to the sound of my voice now. But regardless of that, so, it's all about respecting people is the point that I'm trying to get to here. So something that annoys the fuck out of me, here's a real world example of where I think that IP can be a form of censorship. There is one of my favorite book series of all time, and just franchises. I shouldn't even call it a book series because there's been so much for it, and I really love a lot of it. Not all of it, but I love a lot of it. And that is Dune, of course, by Frank Herbert, originally created by Frank Herbert, and has been continued on for way too long, and in some really asinine ways, by his son, Brian Herbert, and by a guy that I've never been a big fan of as far as a writer, that being Kevin J. Anderson. On Twitter, now there had been some fans of Dune that they were really, really passionate. I forget exactly what this guy had made, but it was nothing crazy. But this really passionate, obviously very passionate fan. I mean, if you're making art that pays homage to a franchise, like this guy I think he made like a comic book of Dune, and it was, and it looked brilliant, if I remember correctly exactly what it was. Brian Herbert flips the fuck out on Twitter and says, delete that now, get it off the internet, you are not allowed to do that, blah, blah, blah. And he just tears into this person, and he starts saying, we have to protect the Dune franchise. Well, protect it from what and from who? Its own fans? What kind of horse shit are you talking about, Brian Herbert? This guy did this fan did a labor of love over this thing, and and you're gonna give him shit? Oh, go fuck yourself. So in that sense, yeah, like this fan who was expressing his love, his respect for the Dune franchise, effectively, Brian Herbert was threatening the law on him, on this fan. Outrageous. And it made me wonder, is this why you don't get a whole, even though I don't know what you could do against cosplayers, is this why you don't see a lot of Dune cosplayer pictures getting shared around in stories? I'm sure they're at these conventions. Okay. I am not saying that they're not. I am just saying you don't often see them shared on a lot of websites. Of course, granted, also the quote unquote news sites for, nerds and everything. Dune isn't exactly the hot topic right now. So I wonder if maybe that's the reason that you don't see it so much. But somehow, like, Comic Book Girl 19 gets away with doing a whole Doom Club and whatever, and I don't see Brian Herbert hammering down on her. But honestly, I think she is part of a marketing plan from is it Lionsgate or whoever's running Denis Villeneuve's Dune movie that's going to be coming out. I think that they hired Comic Book Girl 19. I think she does interesting work. I don't trust her. She's in the system. And I'm not saying there's necessarily anything wrong with her, taking the money, okay, and doing that. But that's got to be what's going down. I can't. Otherwise, I mean, the way that Brian Herbert acts, how is he not taking her down, So, and I mean, because she gets kind of, dressed up like a Bene Gesserit witch and so on, or like a Bene Gesserit, I shouldn't say Bene Gesserit. The Bene Gesserit witch must leave. Anyway, so yes, absolutely, IP laws can be censorship, even censorship against completely benign and, stuff that's done out of love and respect by fans. Take, for example, Star Trek Exnar. There's another one where, effectively IP laws keep great content from being made, as far as like that the consequences of both laws are the same. Absolutely. It keeps stuff from getting created and it really disrupts the creative process. And I think that's horrendous to ever do. I've had the kindness of over the years. I've had a few different people like ask me, hey, can I, base this in the Sovereign Universe? Can I do this? And whether or not anything ever comes of it, is neither here nor there. I'm honored that people even think about it, that they want to like come up with their own podcast or they want to write a book or do their own artwork or something like that that's based around the characters or based around something within the Sovereign Universe. I think it's dynamite. It's wonderful. And I appreciate that they ask. Like, I appreciate the respect being given to me that I'm being asked about it, Like, do you mind if I do this? I'm never going to say no, go right ahead. I think it's beautiful. In fact, honestly, to some degree, I wish more people would do stuff with the Sovereign Universe. I know I have to come out with some more Sovereign Universe stuff, maybe for you to get excited about it. But I love the custom artwork and everything. I mean, all that's great. But I have no problem with that. Like, please, and if you want to put out some really twisted shit, I mean, all I have to do is just say, yeah, I didn't make that. That's not me. I'm not behind that. And then that's it. But there's no reason for me to stop you from, creating what you want to create, even if it's based upon my work. And honestly, the concerns around IP, when you get into that, it really just shows how fragile so many creators are. And I don't want to be disrespectful necessarily in that, but just, I'm never worried about it. If somehow I came up with Star Wars or whatever, I don't give a rat's fucking ass if people try and copy me. Go ahead, you make your Star Crash, you make your Hardware Wars, you make your Battlestar Galacticas, you make whatever the fuck you want that copies me. I don't care. You know why? Because I know how good I am. Not because I made Star Wars. I'm talking about me, Brian Sovereign. I know how good I am at what I do. All right. No one can copy me. No one can copy my style. They can try, but no one can deliver what I deliver. So I'm not worried about it. Go ahead. You can copy me. I mean, and how flattering, but you're never going to be me. You're never going to deliver what I can deliver. So I have absolute confidence. I don't need to put IP laws on shit. I don't need anything like that. I mean, I could get in. There's an old argument, it's been about a year or two, I guess, since I really talked about it. Or maybe it's been a little over a year. There's something to be said about the whole hologram thing, right? Like, holograms of Michael Jackson, holograms of Tupac, and so on, or, like emulating people after they're dead. That's a whole other conversation that I'm not going to get into right now. But bottom line being, now I don't consider it a legitimate, just like I don't see IP as a legitimate form of property. I see it as censorship, but I don't see it as legitimate. Again, yes, it operates as censorship. But I think that that's a terrible thing. And the Brian Herbert Dune example is perfect to illustrate exactly how that happens. And what a shame. Like, what a genuine shame, and what a shithead. Frankly, Brian Herbert. I have no problem. I'll say that to his face. If I ever saw him at a convention, I'd tell him. I'd say, that is so piss poor of you to do. What, you don't have enough? Like, what, your books aren't selling well enough or something? Or is it because you're so terrified? I mean, because I think Paramount and CBS, same thing with Axanar. I think they were scared to death that Star Trek fans were making better Star Trek than they were. They're terrified of that. And I think Dune, it's the same deal. Like, because a lot of those new books, they suck. I didn't think all of them did, but it's getting to the point now. It's like, all right, guys, this didn't take 2 novels. What the fuck? I mean, it's shit. And they're probably terrified that if someone else was writing Dune content, I mean, and they can't really stop them, right? Because you can be relatively anonymous and post this stuff up and whatever. But then, the person can't exactly get the credit. So again, effectively the law is keeping somebody from, really getting the fruits of their creative labor, right? But yeah, I mean, you can't really stop. But I think Brian Herbert's scared to death that Dune fans could do Dune better than he does. Hell, fucking Westwood does Dune better. Westwood Studios and whoever else that makes a Dune video game can do Dune better than he fucking does. It's so pathetic. So yeah, that's a great point to bring up, is that, and people don't think about it, is that IP is really, is very much a form of censorship, as much as it is perceived or thought to be a protection. It's actually censorship. And it's ironic because a lot of the advocates for protection of IP, authors and some others, a lot of them would say censorship is horrible, but they don't realize that their own IP laws are engaging in censorship. I'll tell you, in fact, I'm going to hopefully finally, for September actually, record an episode about Harlan Ellison, about his life and so on. I couldn't do it right away. People asked for it. Sovereign Tech listeners asked for it after I did the For Harlan episode after he passed away. I tried a couple times to record it over the past couple months, and I just broke down in pretty rough shape both times doing it. So I'm going to try and knock it out this time. But Harlan's one where, I'll admit it. Harlan hated censorship, hated it, but he loved IP laws, and he didn't realize, he didn't, and I never got to talk to him about it in that way because I wasn't really an anarchist at the time, but he didn't realize the contradiction in his way of thinking. So anyway, it's a really genuinely great point to bring up. So, let's move on from that. But yeah, IP again can be a form of censorship, and I wish other creators would see that, and then maybe they'd say, oh shit. Of course, a lot of them, what they want to do, right, is they want to reform how IP works. That way it's not protected by the gun, and maybe more it's protected by code or something like that. But I still think at the end of the, regardless of how you're trying to protect it or how you're trying to do it, I mean, you could do kind of a proof of creation, like I was the one that came up with it first, but that's about the only ethical thing you could do, because you try to do anything beyond that and you're going to start getting into, censorship. You're going to start getting into, like areas of creative control that I don't think are helpful to art, and art is the basis of human condition in a very real way. So anyway, okay, let's move on from that, and you can read stuff by Stefan Kinsella that are far better than my words as far as why IP is bullshit. Okay, so next question here. So, very simple. This is asked on Patreon as well, and I think it's actually, we talked about it last week, but it's kind of a question that was actually asked during our September live Hangout Q&A that I didn't have time to get to. So I'll get to it here, but very simple. What type of anime do you like? Last week, I think I mentioned watching, that I recommended Darling in the Franxx, which is a newer, that's very new. That's this year. A newer anime that you can catch probably on Crunchyroll. I torrented it, but brilliant, beautiful, cute, romantic, anime. And there's not a lot of new anime that I really like, but that's one of them that I thought turned out really, really well. I'm not so into, before anyone asks, there's 2 big ones I'm going to tell you that I'm not so much into. I am not so much into the Shonen Jump properties. I understand. I get Naruto. I get, One Punch. I get it. Okay. I'm not the biggest fan, of all that. It just doesn't, it really doesn't do anything for me. Granted, when Naruto was running, like I was more, at least in the States, I was more intrigued by, Avatar: The Last Airbender and so on, which they're not similar, but they feel kind of similar in a way. And so, yeah, I mean, I just kind of, chose my target, and I was like, no, I'll watch Avatar. And, Avatar is not technically anime, at least not out of Japan. So I don't know that you want to count that. But regardless, I never really got into any of the Shonen Jump properties. The other one that I understand, I think it's important to discuss, Dragon Ball Z, okay, or Dragon Ball, and then Dragon Ball Super, and so on. I mean, and believe me, I've watched them all, okay? I still have watched them all because they are kind of this cultural phenomenon. But that said, there's a few animes, is that the right plural form for that, that were kind of the first to really hit America, and they did so during like Adult Swim on Cartoon Network in the 90s and the early aughts. And if you had the luck of the draw, and it really was luck of the draw, except for maybe Outlaw Star, if you had the luck of the draw of getting translated to English and getting aired on Cartoon Network late at night, okay, in America in the late 90s and the early aughts, you became legendary in this country. Not in Japan. You became legendary here. I mean, Dragon Ball is a big deal in Japan. So are the Shonen Jump properties, okay? But you take things like Cowboy Bebop, Outlaw Star, for some reason. I liked Outlaw Star a lot. Like, I thought that was really, really solid stuff. And that's the one that it seems like time has forgotten, because everybody remembers Cowboy Bebop. Everybody remembers Dragon Ball, Dragon Ball Z running. Dragon Ball would be the one that would run at night because, it was a little more adult. I mean, you have fucking Bulma stripping out of nowhere. And then, little Gohan is peeing into a waterfall. Here comes the waterfall, right? All that. But anyway, you get my drift here. Yeah, I don't know what happened with Outlaw Star and why that didn't exactly take off. That doesn't make any fucking sense to me. So, but to the conversation, I'm not the biggest. I get Cowboy Bebop. I understand Trigun. Like I get it. Okay, Johnny Young Bosch. Yeah, wow, he's great. Vash the Stampede. Yep, got it. I mean, I understand. None of those really did anything for me. And that's probably sacrilege to say about Cowboy Bebop, but they just don't really do anything for me. And Dragon Ball Z, we got to be honest with ourselves, okay? Like it's a cultural icon, but that doesn't mean that it's actually good. All right. To spread out the manga in such a way that, and I've watched the uncensored versions too, where is it Hercule, where he's actually Mr. Satan or whatever. Like believe me, I've done my homework on this shit. Okay. Because it used to be, and in some ways still is, really important to me to know this stuff, to know my history in my, my nerddom. Okay. If I have to watch 5 minutes of Krillin's eyebrows, twitching again, I'm going to shit myself. Like I can't do it. And we did that for years, in the late 90s and in the early aughts. And that is completely unacceptable. And I am ashamed of myself for even pretending to think that cartoon was somehow, I mean, it's cool and it's not, right? It's cool if you watch it. Like they did the rehash recently, not Dragon Ball Super, but they did where they kind of, they tightened it up and they did a re-artistry of the original Dragon Ball Z, and it's significantly shorter, and then it works and it's cool, right? But Dragon Ball Z, as it was presented originally, the original version of it, stop, guys, be gals and Z's, be honest, okay? That there are entire, probably weeks of our lives, at least, that we've lost to stupid eye blinking and Kamehamehas like charging up for way too long. And fuck it. Okay. I get it. I understand the cool factor. Believe me, I'm an expert, okay, in studying cool. I'm not going to say I'm an expert in cool, but I've certainly been studying it my whole life. All right. And I understand. Okay. It's kind of cool. Like there's something to be said for that, but that there's no way you're going to tell me you've been watching like Dragon Ball Z over and over again for the past 20 years or something. Like, you just haven't been. No way. No one would do that unless you're doing it like 2.5x in VLC player or something over and over again. And I just have a very hard time believing it. I mean, yeah, there's some funny moments, like when Vegeta is wearing a pink shirt for the first time and he's like, haven't you ever seen a guy in a pink shirt before? I mean, like that's funny. All right. And when Trunks comes out of nowhere, I mean, you can't, you're just like, holy shit, wow, with that sword, but come on. Again, be honest with yourself. Like there was so much time wasted with that. So yeah, not a big fan of Dragon Ball. Dragon Ball Z anyway. Dragon Ball was actually pretty good, but Dragon Ball Z, yeah. And I watched Dragon Ball Super, and when we get to Super Saiyan God, Saiyan Super something, it's just like at first it's cool, and then it's like, all right, that's enough. So those are the couple that I think, really need to be discussed and say, hey, these actually aren't that great. They were products of their time. They were like a rarity, and so everybody kind of jumped on it. And it's annoying now, even more so, because now you have all these actors who are like trying to be cool, saying that they're anime fans when it's like, shut up, like just stop. You're not really, I know this character, and tell me the deep cuts, right? And then we can talk about it. Like if some celebrity who claims to be an anime fan, like I remember, what was it, one of the WrestleManias where Ronda Rousey came out, this is before she was a wrestler, when she came out and she was wearing a Dragon Ball Z shirt, it's like her power level's 9 million or something like, and like, Ronda Rousey's so awesome. Stop. No, she is for what she does, but not because of that fucking t-shirt. The marketing. Oh, anyway. So, find me a celebrity that comes out wearing like a Vampire Hunter D shirt. Then you've got me interested. All right, let's talk about the deep cuts here. And I'm not trying to be some kind of fucking hipster. The hipsters were the people that love Dragon Ball Z. Those are the hipsters because they're loving something without a good reason. Okay, only that, like, it's something that's kind of new or whatever, when they don't honestly say to themselves and analyze this and go, this is shit. So anyway, okay, so as far as the anime that I do like, I forget what I mentioned last week on the show because I did talk about it briefly, but Record of Lodoss War, easily one of my favorites. That's such an epic saga to go with that. Fist of the North Star, fantastic. Vampire Hunter D, which I mentioned, both movies. Even Bloodline was good, even though that came out way too late. The books are phenomenal too for Vampire Hunter D, but Vampire Hunter D, when you see those mechanical horses and everything, you want to talk about great fucking art. That art was tremendous. I just love Vampire Hunter D. Robotech, of course. Robotech. Now here's one. Robotech is an American product, right? Now most people who know, if you even know what Robotech is, you kind of know the deal behind it, right? That it was actually much like Voltron, the original Voltron, and some other cartoons in the 80s, it was actually based off of like a couple different, 2 or 3 different animes in Japan, and it was put together, re-edited, and composited in America to be a completely different product. And that's what Robotech ended up being. And amazingly, even in Japan, Robotech is often considered better than the sum of its parts. It's often considered better than Macross or Macross Delta or any of that. Robotech is, I've said this many times, it is, as far as animation goes, it is the most romantic animated series in history. It is just beautiful what it puts out there, and it is brilliant what you can do when you take all these different pieces and put them together. And those, the people that put that together in the 80s in America, fuck, you did it. You pulled it off. Robotech is just legendary, and with every reason. Someday we'll probably get a live action movie of it. It's been tried a few times, and well, we'll see. Gundam. I love the whole Gundam series, particularly Gundam Wing. That's one that was part of that 90s anime rush in America. But I think Gundam Wing kind of deserves it because it was really epic, and we never really saw anything like that in the States. The entire Mobile Suit Gundam series is also, is amazing. If you ever go to Japan, you cannot imagine, like, Gundam is like Star Trek over there, where, you have literal academies for Gundams that don't even exist. that are fictional, but it's such a, oh man, love Gundam. Gundam ZZ, not so much. I wasn't the biggest fan of that. And some of the later stuff that they've done hasn't been as impressive, but the OG Mobile Suit Gundam and Gundam Wing, nice work, really, really brilliant stuff. Very epic. Code Geass is kind of a newer one. I really enjoyed that. Boy, I'm just going down the list here. Let's see. Sailor Moon. Of course, Sailor Moon is, that wasn't on Cartoon Network. That was a whole animal in and of itself. I have Sailor Moon memorabilia. I have the DVDs of Sailor Moon behind me here in the BDSM studio. I am such a big fan of Sailor Moon. Tuxedo Mask is the fucking man. I cannot tell you how much of my own creative work is completely inspired by Sailor Moon. Just love Sailor Moon. And I don't think there's anything, straight up, I don't think there's anything weird about guys being into that. I mean, I knew tons of guys at the time that were really into it. It was so cool, to see that put on display. And we didn't even get to see all the really cool shit, like the lesbianism and so on, and a lot of the more unorthodox things that show would put on display. Totally common in Japan, but revolutionary in America. And I still think Sailor Moon was revolutionary in America. I can sing the theme song by heart. I really, just a tremendous show. And if you really want to watch it, because it still kind of fell prey, not as bad, but to some degree of some things taking too long, like Dragon Ball Z did particularly in America. But if you want to watch a nice condensed version of that, Sailor Moon Crystal has been above and beyond. I did not expect it to be as good as it was, but it is a retelling of the story. I mean, it sticks very close to the source material beautifully, but it is stunning art. It is very well done. The soundtrack's amazing. The voice work is phenomenal. I really, really recommend Sailor Moon Crystal if you've never watched Sailor Moon before. Another one that was a bit of a reimagining, but this is a reimagining kind of in the early aughts, and ADV Films was actually responsible for bringing it over, which they brought a lot of things over not onto Cartoon Network, but onto videotape and DVD. But Bubblegum Crisis Tokyo 2040, and it also had a sequel series called AD Police, which is based off of the characters of AD Police within Bubblegum Crisis. Bubblegum Crisis, not Tokyo 2040, just Bubblegum Crisis, was an anime, I think from the 80s in Japan. Very risque stuff. Bubblegum Crisis Tokyo 2040 was not as risque, still very sexy though. I thought it was brilliant. Women heroes in little mecha suits. Fantastic. How can you go wrong, right? And actually it explored a lot of themes that have really stuck with me to this day, including the treatment of robots, the treatment of AI, and so on, and its development. I mean, I really, that's really a lot of the lessons learned, a lot of the moral stories kind of told within Bubblegum Crisis Tokyo 2040 really still sticks with me. But yeah, really, really cool show. Very, very cool show. Like the music in it, there's some great like rock music in it and everything. But the Tokyo 2040 version, I don't really care so much about the original from the 80s. Let's see, what else? Of course, Guyver, Bio-Boosted Armor, fantastic. Don't need to say more. Beast King Go Lion, which is what Voltron was based off of, fantastic. Neon Genesis Evangelion, if you know what it is, you know what it is. But this is easily maybe the most epic anime in history. Yeah, I mean, Evangelion's just out of this fucking world. I mean, the themes explored in that. You're not going to get moral tales like that ever told in America. I guarantee, not unless you're actually watching, like a dubbed version of Evangelion. I love it. Star Blazers, fantastic. Anything with Captain Harlock, I'm there. I'm sold. As far as some hentai, I'm a huge fan of hentai. I do love Fencer of Minerva, which actually Stephanie and I have done reviews for on Patreon. You can find them. I want to do more hentai reviews in the future on Patreon. That's something that's still going to happen because I really like doing that. Because anything to normalize hentai, I think, is really important. So yeah, love Fencer of Minerva. That's a very, very, very libertarian, actually super libertarian anime and hentai. The voice acting for the dubbed version for English is not the greatest in the world, But that's kind of a thing with hentai in general, is that, and actually Stephanie's kind of learned this on her own as a voice actress, is that she's found out that a lot of the erotic jobs and like for animation and everything, they pay pennies. Like they don't pay well at all. And so often that's why I think you don't get the best actresses, voice actresses and actors within those series. Bible Black, very twisted shit. But I got to give credit where credit's due. Like that is a phenomenon as far as hentai goes. And again, it is very twisted, but as long as you can, keep your grasp on reality, and the fact that it's animated, kind of helps you with that. Very interesting stuff that you'll never see anything else like it anywhere else, in any other kind of medium or format, I don't think. The Blue Girl. Anybody in the 90s who gave a shit about anime, any guy anyway, and a lot of gals too. Le Blue Girl, we all know it. We all enjoy it. Yeah, it's cheesy as hell. It's ridiculous. It's kind of Sailor Moon with sex in a way. It's sex ninjas, literally. But so much fun. And funny in its own way. So big fan of Le Blue Girl. One of the rare, I think it was the first anime or hentai to make the leap into being made into like a live action movie. Granted it was a porn, but a live action movie of some kind. Others would later on as well, but I think that might have the honor, and I think it's fair to say it's an actual honor to do that in the first place. So huge fan of hentai. Lover-in-Law, any of the ones that I've reviewed on Sovereign Tech, I'm a fan of, more or less. But anyway, yeah, there's my list for what I've dug in anime. I'm sure there's a million more that I didn't mention, but those are the biggies. I do love Guyver. Guyver, the Bio-Boosted Armor, is fantastic. That's a really solid one. So yeah, I hope that list was fun for you. So let's get on to another subject. Let's do another quick question here, and then we'll get into our album of the week. Hopefully nobody found what I just all that talking about that was boring, but I got to ask, so I thought I'd give it the time of day. Let's see. Any thoughts on Disco Demolition Night? Oh boy, do I ever. Disco Demolition Night. So ironically, our album of the week this week is not a metal or rock record, or album, I should say, even though I use those terms interchangeably, even though I'm not talking about a physical record, because this is this is all about heavy metal, or at least rock. And again, as I've talked in previous episodes, like those terms don't, like metal and rock, I don't always differentiate with those. So Disco Demolition Night. A day that will live in infamy. What effectively happened? We're talking about 1979. This is July of 1979. And it's at Comiskey Park in Chicago, in Chicago, Illinois. And you have a game between the Chicago White Sox, a baseball game, obviously, between the Chicago White Sox and the Detroit Tigers. Now, shockingly, this did not happen in Detroit. That's where you kind of would have expected it to happen. But it actually happened in Chicago. Detroit, Rock City, right? So what ends up happening is you have this guy, Steve Dahl, who is he's a DJ, which at the times, particularly in the 70s and the 80s, radio DJs, that was a fairly prestigious job. You think if your Howard Sterns came out of that, your Casey Kaslams, there's a whole slew of them. And these were, for a lot of people, these were real heroes. They're very much the podcasters of their day, but, even more so. And Steve Dahl would become quite the revolutionary, and maybe not the most peaceful, because he would be a part of this really large wave in America, in the United States at the time, where at the time the biggest music in the world in 1979 was disco. Okay, and in fact, disco was so huge, you end up with what? Kiss comes out in 79 with their album Dynasty, right? And they have their song I Was Made for Lovin' You, which is effectively a disco song. And Paul Stanley would even say, oh yeah, and actually I think to this day, I Was Made for Lovin' You is still their biggest hit from Kiss. We're talking about one of the biggest bands ever, one of the most award-winning bands ever, one of the longest running bands ever, Kiss, and who are about to go on a farewell tour, actually, which I got to make sure I'm part of. But they, their biggest hit was in 1979, and it was effectively a disco song. Now, fortunately, Kiss would remedy this, I guess would it be 93 when Alive 3 came out? and it would have a full rocking version, no disco, full rocking, full metal version, effectively, of I Was Made for Loving You on there. In fact, it's the best track on Alive 3. I love it. I mean, it's so intense. So, that said, okay, but just so you understand how big of a deal disco was, is that even rock acts were starting to make disco songs. It was at that stage. Hell, Chicago, at the time, one of my favorite bands ever, along with Kiss. In fact, I've said Chicago might be the one band that could unseat Kiss as far as in my top spot, personally. Chicago even starts making disco albums at this point, okay? And a lot of people see it as them going downhill, but it's what they were doing, all right? It's that big of a deal. Disco is fucking everywhere, okay? And the rock acts, or, the purist kind of rock acts, again, like I said, Kiss was getting in it, Chicago was getting in it, all these other bands are getting in it, were kind of rebelling against it because they didn't like that they weren't getting all the radio play. They weren't getting all the action, as it were. And I think rightfully so. There were some arguments to be had about it because, yeah, as much brilliance as it really does take to come up with a hit song, and it does, like what ABBA came up with, you got to have some kind of brilliance to come up with that shit. What the Bee Gees came up with, you got to have some brilliance to come up with that shit. And of course, disco was riding high on the release of the movie Saturday Night Fever, right? At this time. So, but effectively, you had your rock DJs, okay, and what would it, I guess, effectively be metal DJs, were sort of leading a revolution against disco in the country. All right. And this would come to a head at what is now known as Disco Demolition Night in July of 1979 at this game. Effectively, if you brought a disco record, you could get into this game for 98 cents. That was kind of that was sort of the deal that went down. What ends up happening is they take all of the, like 50, they were expecting like 20,000 people to show up for this game. 50,000 people show up for this game. I'm leaving some little details out, but that's not what... None of that really matters. What ends up happening is Steve Dahl and all these people, they start, like, there's security at the gates. There's no security on the field, and they end up like putting all of these records that come, all these disco records, literal physical records, brought into the game, and they end up like blowing it up and setting it on fire. And I mean, the game has to be stopped. There's like damage to the field. I mean, I don't know necessarily how many people got hurt or whatever, but I mean, there was explosions. Like this was, there's no way this would happen today. Like not even close, because it would be considered like a terrorist act. I mean, there's no way that it could happen, but it was Steve Dahl and all of these, people saying, rock and roll forever. Like we're tired of disco. We've had enough of this. I mean, and imagine that, I mean, in Europe, maybe not so crazy, right? Because you have people that go fucking apeshit about, like soccer games, and you end up with people getting trampled and die, over that sort of thing. But this is just over music that this whole situation happened. And a lot of people see it as really the death knell of disco. Like this was, the record companies couldn't get a clearer message than, an explosion in the middle of a baseball game, a major baseball game, with 50,000 people setting records on fire, and boom. I mean, how clear could it get? And disco does start to fade away at that point. Now, a lot of the bands, including the Bee Gees and some others, that were well known for disco, end up transitioning kind of after that into more of the 80s pop scene. And so, I mean, there's some bands that, the Commodores don't necessarily make it in the 80s, right? ABBA kind of goes away, or ABBA, and so on. That they kind of end up disappearing, and you end up with this whole new music scene. Arguably, in my opinion, the greatest music scene to ever grace the earth, that being the 1980s. It's so incredibly expressive and emotional, and I think it matched kind of the emotions that people were building up, in some ways maybe to the reaction of what could be considered the cheapness of disco, because disco is very cheap, much like a lot of today's pop, not all, but a lot of today's pop is very cheap. It's paint by numbers, right? And so you could say that it was a reaction to that. If you want to, you could say that. This is Disco Demolition Night is a very complex subject. So to just ask me any thoughts, okay, on Disco Demolition Night. So first and foremost, I absolutely am what you could call a metalhead. So to clarify, as far as like musical styles that I like, if instrumentals, okay, with instrumental, not like soundtracks with, I don't know, some stupid compilation of songs that a record company chose. I mean, with actual music from the movie. If instrumental scores / soundtracks were a genre, that would actually be my favorite kind of music. But it's not technically a genre. So, but heavy metal is a genre, and yes, that would fall as my favorite type of music, and that I listen to perhaps the most, and that I would identify with, and that, I've gone to the most concerts for, and so on. I love all kinds of other music too, pretty much anything except country. I can really get into, I love 80s pop. I love, a lot of 90s music and so on. Not so much a fan of grunge, but, whatever. But I listen to all different kinds of music. So anyway, but I would definitely, would I have been, I guess maybe an important question to ask is that, would I have been one of those people that went to Disco Demolition night? Maybe. But here's the problem, is that a lot of people, especially now looking back on it, and some commentators at the time in 1979 were claiming that this was a racist act, that this was a bunch of white people not happy that their world was changing and so on. And that, they didn't like that because disco admittedly was, with like kind of the Studio 54 scene, with the dance club scene that disco would bring with it, which is largely, at least in America, which is kind of an outcrop of what was already long going on in Europe, would allow for, would embrace really homosexuality, would embrace, yes, black people, other races, and, feminism and a lot of other things. I mean, disco really would. And, the feeling goes is that, well, heavy metal didn't do that, and it was a white boys club and so on. And so there is this narrative around Disco Demolition Night that really this is more like the KKK coming in and lighting fire and burning books, and burning books that were, that they saw as perversions. But instead of books, it's disco records. And instead of guys in white robes, it's people who are into other forms of music than disco. I mean, the argument against disco is actually pretty sound. I mean, there's some disco songs I like. I like ABBA. I like the Bee Gees a lot. There's some stuff from that era that's actually pretty good. But yeah, I get it. It absolutely is paint by numbers. I understand kind of the musical arguments against disco. And in fact, it is so basic that, a lot of commentators will admit it was already dying. Some people say that this is what killed disco. It was already on the way out. Because people, you get tired of if something doesn't have the ability to last, which a lot of disco really doesn't, well, you get sick of it. And, and people, all right, I've heard the song before. It sounds like the same one I heard, a year ago by another group and so on. Okay. So it was already on its way out. I would not write off that there was a heavily racist element to, certainly in the 70s. To Disco Demolition Night. I would not write that off. I don't know that necessarily, you couldn't do it today, right? Because what are you going to burn, MP3 players or smartphones? There's nothing to burn today. But yeah, I guess there could be elements of that, but you got to understand. Here's the funny thing is that I think a lot of people that look upon that. Now, I grew up, actually, there's a great, it's not, I don't know if I should call it a great movie, but there's the Kiss movie, Detroit Rock City, right? Which came out, 97, 98? And in that, you get a glimpse of how metal and rock fans were really against, of course, ironically, all three characters in it are white, or, maybe you wanted to count one of them as Jewish or something. But that's a whole other conversation to be had, our Jewish white people, or, our Jews white people. But anyway, you have that, there is definitely, you get a real glimpse from a teenage perspective, at least, that, there was this backlash against disco. There was this rock versus disco element going on. To say that everybody that felt that way was some kind of racist, no, I don't buy it, because I think the reason that a lot of people were into rock and heavy metal was because it was the music of the rebel and the outlier, not because it was the music of the status quo, because the fuck it was. No, it was not. You know, none of that shit was status quo. So it's very hard to, I mean, I think this whole thing, Disco Demolition Night, the whole thing was fucking marketing that got out of hand, that got out of the control of the people that were trying to do it. All right. That's really what went down. And at the time, you know, kind of a mob mentality was something that was still going on. I mean, you know, we're a hop, skip, and a jump away from a lot of Detroit riots and these other things that were going on. But, you know, while I think the disco club scene was certainly a rebellious thing, and that was, you know, being embracing and bringing in what were previously oppressed aspects of society, I think rock and heavy metal was absolutely doing the same thing, you know, all the way. So it's weird that they even like hated each other. I think just, you know, I really do think that the not necessarily Disco Demolition Night, but the rock versus disco business really was about metalheads wanting to get their music on the radio, you know, and that had been a thing that continued to go on throughout the 80s. That's why, you know, people are still passionate about Headbangers Ball. Like, oh, we finally had a show for ourselves, you know, as metalheads and so on. But of course that ended up going away and would get killed with other things. But yeah, I think there were racist elements of it, but really it was marketing gone wrong. And I do agree that disco was already on its way out. I mean, it really was, like, because a lot of the big name acts, for example, Chicago and, you know, and some others, like their albums that were trying disco weren't selling. Of course, part of the reason they weren't selling is because one disco song in many ways sounds like the other. In many ways. Now, if anyone that's listening is a fan of disco, make me the argument for disco and why you think it's so powerful and such a wonderful form of music. Go ahead. And look, if you want to say, well, because it's great to roller skate too, hey, you are literally listening to, I'm not kidding. I'm dead serious. This is not a joke. You are literally listening to a medal winning roller skater on quads. Okay, I know. I get the appeal to music that you can roller skate to. I completely understand. I'm not joking with you. I have awards. I have medals. I have, you know, speed skating, roller hockey, the whole thing. I can dance on a pair of skates. You don't believe me? Ask the lovely and hyper intelligent Dr. Stephanie Murphy. I can make it happen. So, but yeah, go ahead and make the case for me if you want. But yeah, what was going on with disco was going to fall away anyway. Very similar to what happened with 80s metal, you know, with quote unquote hair metal, where the excess of it got to a point that most people couldn't handle it. And so it was falling away and people were looking for something else and they wanted to go back to maybe like simpler tunes or something. I'm not saying that that's a good thing that happened, but these kind of trends happen on a seemingly generational basis of some kind, to say nothing of the fact that, let's be very clear here, the record companies do not care about music being good. You know, the record industry only cares about selling albums or selling music, like, and making money. They genuinely, in fact, there's great documentaries and books out there about this whole subject, that the record industry has never given a shit about great art, you know, and about great music. I mean, they just haven't. And that's why I think it's interesting that a lot of times when bands get out of the limelight, they actually start making a lot of their best music. I'm not saying that as a hipster thing. I'm saying that as, well, that fucking makes sense. You know, because if they're not under the record industry's thumb anymore, they can make the good shit, right? Because they don't have to, you know, they don't have to work with such and such producer and so on. So, or, you know, such and such handler. Ooh, there's a naughty word. So anyway, so yeah, that's, I hope I answered that to some kind of satisfaction. I mean, that was a real thing. And even like when I was growing up, like in the late 80s and in the 90s, you know, this whole idea that metal is against pop music was still a thing. I'm sure it's still a thing today for young people. Eventually you kind of get over it. And, you know, ultimately, I suppose, my real genre of music is sex. So if pop music is selling sex, or if the metal is selling sex, or whatever it is that's selling sex, or even country could pull this off. She Thinks My Tractor's Sexy, Honky Tonk Badonkadonk, written by a metal guy. You know, if you're selling sex, I'm listening. I'm into your music. I got you. All right. So Anyway, point being is that, you can grow out of like, I mean, I love to identify as a metalhead, and I like, kind of that rebelliousness and everything, but I'm certainly much more than that. I mean, I listen to opera, I listen to, so many different things. So, okay. Yeah, I hope I answered that to some kind of satisfaction. If anyone has thoughts on it, hey, send in an email. We can talk about it. Let's get into, speaking of differing types of music. In fact, this is a genre that is relatively new, even though its roots go back 30 years. Synthwave, okay, which is a pseudo 80s style of music, really. Like, it's pretending to be the 80s, but at the end of the day, it's not actually the same thing as the 80s, right? Sometimes they can pull that off, but not always. So there is an artist, I don't know if it's a group, I'll say an artist, that I recently came upon that I thought their first couple albums were absolutely brilliant. Especially, they're called The Midnight. Their last album, I think, was that Crystalline. Fantastic. There's a song on there called Collateral, sexiest shit you'll ever hear in your life. I mean, the saxophone comes in and it's hot. And I reviewed it. It was the album of the week, maybe like a month ago or so. They just came out with a new album called Kids, and I am not impressed. There is a lot from the whole album. There's no instrumental, or like Collateral was. There's no instrumental tracks in it, and that's kind of disappointing for me. There's always someone singing. It's good. It's not bad, but it's not. I don't feel it's as heartfelt, and it doesn't let you. One of the things to explain what it doesn't let you do. One of the things I love about synthwave is that when there are no words to it, kind of like Perturbator stuff and so on. When there are no words to it, you can kind of fill in your own story of what's going on. You can fill in your own, maybe even your own feelings and whatever, with it. And when the singer comes in, it can still be good. Like, some stuff from Gunship's amazing, right? Which their new album comes out in October. I can't wait. I mean, it can work, but like, you've got to, bringing in a singer on a regular basis is operating on a whole other level of synthwave, where you really have to match more of that 80s sound with the singer. And I just didn't feel it with Kids, with the album Kids by The Midnight. Maybe I got to give it like 5 more listens or something, but I just didn't feel it the same way that I felt Crystalline. I thought that album was tremendous. Their album before, I think it was their self-titled The Midnight, was fantastic too. I feel like they kind of were going a little too far with this, and it didn't let me, because with synthwave, it's heavily based on a cool factor as well as nostalgia is a major part of it. And when someone's singing in it, I don't necessarily get to all the time, the whole time, like 1 or 2 songs, sure. But the whole time, I don't get to take in that nostalgia. I don't get to put myself in that place. Like there's a song on there called Arcade 2, and I don't get to be put my head in the arcade, because not exactly. It just, I don't know, when there's a little too much narrative, it doesn't work. And I'm not saying that music can't be great when it does a narrative. There's a lot of metal songs where that's absolutely true. Take, for example, Judas Priest's Blood Red Skies. But yeah, I don't know. I didn't feel this album really. You can check it out. I bought it like at 12:01. Like as soon as they released it on Bandcamp, I jumped on it because I was so impressed by their previous work. And this one just, I don't know, it didn't do it for me in the same way. So I didn't roll with it. But you can check it out. The Midnight, Kids, maybe you're feeling it. Maybe your emotions are there in that way, and your nostalgia's there in that way, and you can take it in. But for me, it didn't exactly work. So, okay, that's it. I'm going to wrap this baby up. And I guess this will be your last Wednesday Q&A for September 2018. I will see all of you in October for the next one. But there are more episodes to come throughout September. We still have a Relationship Rhombus to come out. And maybe a couple of surprises. So, anyway, hold on to your hats. Woo! I will see all of you on the other side. Oh, yeah, the Star Wars update with Rob, one of my favorite times of the month. That's coming too. I'll see you on the other side.